Bringing a bike to life and going from concept to final delivery of that final bike is an incredibly long and tricky process. But how is it actually all done? We went to Specialised in Morgan Hill and found out. So I've just jumped inside and I'm joined by Cameron Piper. Can you just introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do here at Specialised?
Sure. So I joined Specialised almost 8 years ago. I was running our in-house wind tunnel for about 2.5 years, working to develop our aerodynamic product as well as working with a lot of our athletes. And since then, I moved over to the road product team, specifically managing Tarmac, Athos, Shiv, and LA Sprint, so all the performance road families that we have within the category of Specialised.
So now when you're conceptualizing a bike, you know, the very first steps of starting that project, what does that look like and how do you go about it?
Typically we start out with some different targets based on the target rider that we have as well as experience that we're hoping to improve for that rider. And so with a project like LA Sprint, it's a performance rider. They want speed, they want a fast bike aerodynamically, they want a bike that's handling really well and how they expect it, as well as a bike that rides really well when it comes to a race experience or when they're training. So we'll start off by setting those goals for the project and spend a number of months really validating and understanding how realistic those goals are to fine-tune the actual targets that we have going forward into development.
So then from that point, what's the next step? Is it kind of a CAD process, or how do you then take it forwards from once you've kind of analysed and set out those initial targets?
So throughout that whole entire concept phase, we're really taking some older projects and learnings that we've had from those and maybe cutting them up, testing the wind tunnel, doing different things to really prototype and understand the different performance targets that we set for. And throughout that whole process, an engineer or designer is also working on the CAD or the 3D for the new bike, which allows us to then 3D print those models or work on small manufacturing processes that we can as we're moving towards a phase where we're actually going to create the production CAD, or what we're actually moving to create tools with and then test the overall frame's structure. When we're actually through part of the concept phase and we have rough 3D planned out, we're able to 3D print or kind of make a rapid prototype. This one's machined out of ABS, to allow us to then bring it to the wind tunnel and test some of the performance targets we have, specifically with the aerodynamics. Also, by able to do this, we're able to hold onto a frame physically, which can tell you a lot about a project. And then at the same time too, with this one frame, if we said, hey, we're not really where we want to be aerodynamically, we can cut it up, we can 3D print other parts and then place on this frame to say, what can we tweak a little bit to better meet those goals and really take the next steps in the project.
So with this one, were there any specific learnings that you took that then went into the final product?
Definitely. So this was a little bit further down the concept phase where it was actually one of the second prints that we did. Okay. And you can see here, there was an adjustment of the seat stay height.
Yes.
And that was done a little bit more to say, hey, can we get a little bit more out of the UCI box that we have within this frame? Can we make it a little bit faster aerodynamically by moving the location of these? At the same time too, this project was running in parallel with Tarmac SL7. So we're also learning things from each end of the project that would kind of change the next steps for the project as we moved along.
Okay, so we have got here one of the first fully built metal frames that came out of the Asian factory. What role would have this played?
So when it comes to the first frames that we actually have welded together, there's a lot of different things that we do. We call them typically looking samples because you learn a lot from that first process. So whether it's weld alignment or specific aspects of the frame with cable routing or different things of actually building a bike with it, it allows us to run through those different steps and then also understand where we need to change the manufacturing process for some of the tubes or the actual welding alignment or different aspects of that. So like this frame, for example, you can see this was done very early on in the process. It was one of the larger frame sizes, and there's a lot of aspects of the frame that are not in the production version because we learn things as we go, and it's okay to be able to adjust and make the product better as we go. So like your different cable ICR grommets are no longer required because we moved to internal routing in certain areas of the frame, or made this front trailer hanger completely removable.
And then what's the next step after this? Where do we go from here?
So as we kind of tweak or ensure that dimensionally this frame meets its requirements, we're able to then bring it to the test lab and say, does this frame meet the stiffness and structural requirements that we have for this frame to be the best frame it can be? And that's a process where you're making a number of samples and testing them to ensure that based on the material thicknesses across the frame, you're meeting those needs. So there's quite a bit of work that's done after this, and this is one of many samples that allows us to kind of tweak and fine-tune everything to ensure that we're creating the right product.
So we're on to testing now. Talk to me about what you're doing and how you're doing it and what processes are involved in testing a frame.
Right, so we spoke a little bit about FEA. FEA helps us to understand those rider-based stiffness metrics that we're aiming for based on the tube shapes. But now we get to the point where we can physically test a frame in the test lab to understand if we're meeting those stiffness targets. And those stiffness targets are different targets across the frame that we've developed over a number of years, both in the lab but also with real-world riders, to understand where the stiffness makes the most sense for that experience that they're going for. And then additionally, beyond that, we also have a number of standards that relate to the frame's overall strength and how it will survive over a lifetime of a rider's inputs, whether it's those fatigue things or the experiences that I might have out on the road, to ensure that it's safe to ride and will last for that rider's entire lifetime, really.
So that's all lab testing. What's the next step in that process?
So typically after you get the first set of results, both the stiffness results as well as the strength and fatigue results, on a carbon frame you're adjusting the layup to either try to meet one set of those targets or adjust something across the frame in order to get to where you need to be. And with the aluminum frame, we're changing the thickness of the materials across the frame in order to meet those targets. So that's where we go back and we basically manufacture other frames to manipulate the frame in a way that allows us to adjust based on the first set of results that we'd received.
So once you've got that final perfect recipe of tube thickness and you're happy with the geometry of the frame and kind of everything's come together, is it then just a case of pressing a big green button and kind of putting the whole thing into production?
I wish it was that easy, yeah. So after we know we're meeting all the project's targets, so we hit all of our aerodynamic goals, we hit all the frame stiffness goals that we had and the ride quality, then we also need to make sure we're meeting all those strength and fatigue goals that we had. So we're meeting all the standards that Specialized has to understand that this frame is going to be the best frame out there. And as we move into the next phase, we're going back to the supplier and we're saying, let's make a lot of these. And understand that as you ramp up and you're creating more of these frames, ensuring that all those welds are consistent, ensuring that the frame dimensions are all consistent across a larger scale of production. And that's when you know you're really ready to go into production and ready to get to the next step of the project.
What's that?
That would be your full production approval.
Yep.
But there's a couple of things that were happening along that time to kind of button things up. And some of that as well as ensuring that we're field testing these frames, making sure that not only in the lab we're meeting all the targets, we're also meeting them out on the road. So we're involving a lot of people within the building as well as some of our athletes to ensure that this bike meets the needs, not only on paper, but also out on the road, which is extremely important.
I mean, that's pretty far down in the process. So how much change can the humans out on the road actually have?
A lot, actually. Okay. So it's usually we're field testing when we have a frame that's safe to ride. We know it's meeting all of our standards when it comes to the strength and fatigue. Yeah. And at that point, if there's something that comes up that maybe speaks differently to what we're seeing in the lab, then we need to make sure we have an action for that. And that means we might have to take a change and do something to ensure that riders have the experience that they're expecting out on the road.
Now, one of the most obvious things that everyone sees when they look at a bike is the colour of it. And obviously, you're going to end up with a whole range of colours for all the different bikes that you're going to be creating. How does that work? Yeah,
so usually early on in the process when we have a 3D printed frame, so something physical that our colors and graphics team can actually take a look at, that's when we bring them in. So as a product manager, I'll help to set really the stage for what this rider is and what the experience is for that rider. And with that, they'll take that information, they build out color palettes based on the year, what's trending in the industry, what's trending outside of the industry, kind of what that next set of colors will be, as well as specific graphics or paint techniques we're developing in order to meet the overall needs of what that experience might be. So we have a team upstairs that's almost worldwide in some ways because they're really evaluating everything across the globe to ensure that we're meeting the needs of that rider.
For the Alley Sprint, for example, how many different options would have been created to then whittle it down to that, the winning bunch?
Yeah, we at the start kind of open it up and let them decide on what's going to be used with some graphics, what's going to be relatively clean across the entire frame. And with Alley Sprint, it's one of those families that we try to keep a little bit more lively because the frame set business is really important for a lot of those riders who want to build it up and really make it their own based on their own style and look. So there's a number of different colorways that are maybe a little bit more fun or use new techniques that we've developed over a year or two to make this frame shine, not only from the ways that it's been designed by our engineers, but also for the rider who's looking at it to show their expression.
So there we have it. Hopefully you found that really interesting and insightful. If you've got any questions, do drop them down in the comments below. If you enjoyed the video, drop it a like, subscribe to the channel for more content, and I'll see you again very soon.